Okay, let's unpack this. Just when you, the listener, were perhaps, starting to regain your breath after that absolutely bonkers result.
Oh, the Bournemouth game.
The dizzying, chaotic 4-4 draw with Bournemouth, the Manchester United captain, Bruno Fernandes, decides to drop an absolute bombshell off the pitch.
And the timing, I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you?
This wasn't just a routine post-match chat, was it? This was a fundamental challenge to the club's hierarchy, released at the precise moment maximum drama was guaranteed.
It absolutely was. We're diving deep into the stunning revelations from his recent interview, covering everything from, well, staggering financial figures to genuine emotional pain.
It truly is the perfect encapsulation of modern Manchester United, isn't it?
It is. You have defensive chaos on the pitch, then some individual brilliance to paper over the cracks, and then a massive, uncomfortable, existential conversation about loyalty, money, and structural failure all piled on top.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to guide you through it all.
Yeah, we have to look at the cold, hard financial figures surrounding that Saudi Pro League offer. We need to explore the captain's deeply emotional response to feeling. And this is his word, unwanted.
And then contrast that with the club's official statements, which tell a very different story.
A completely contradictory one. And then, most importantly, dissect the firestorm this has ignited amongst a fan base that is already walking on the tightest of ropes.
Absolutely. And let's start by grounding ourselves in why Bruno Fernandes is, for so many supporters, fundamentally irreplaceable. He arrived in January 2020.
From Sporting Lisbon, yep.
For a fee of £47 million, a figure that now feels like the bargain of the century, really.
It really does.
Since then, his statistics aren't just good. They're staggering. Over 300 appearances, more than 100 goals, and nearly 100 assists.
I mean, that is consistently world-class output, and it's come during arguably the club's most dysfunctional and crisis-ridden period since the 1980s.
He's the lighthouse in the storm.
He is. He is the standard setter, and his significance is amplified because he hasn't just delivered numbers. He has delivered heart. He's been the one driving force who never seems to hide.
Right.
And what he revealed to Canal 11, which is the channel for the Portuguese Football Federation, goes right to the very core of this ongoing identity crisis at Old Trafford.
This isn't just a contract dispute.
No. This is a philosophical breakdown between a loyal, high-performing player and what he perceives as a hesitant, purely transactional hierarchy.
Let's start with the hard numbers, because they are truly jaw-dropping and they set the stage for everything that follows. We're talking about the immense, almost predatory proposal that landed on the desks at Old Trafford from Al Hilal during the summer.
It was titanic. It really was. And you have to appreciate the context here. Al Hilal, one of the biggest clubs in the Saudi Pro League, was reportedly willing to pay Manchester United a transfer fee of around £100 million.
Just pause on that.
Yeah.
$100 million.
For a player who, though outstanding, will be turning 32 next year. In European football terms, a three-figure fee for a 30-something attacking midfielder is almost unheard of.
It just doesn't happen.
It represents the absolute maximum financial yield you could ever hope for.
And for Fernandes himself, the personal financial reward on offer was, well, it was equally astronomical.
Well, precisely. Al Hilal offered wages of up to £700,000 a week.
£700,000.
Yeah.
A week.
Could put that into perspective, that would have instantly made him one of the highest paid players on the planet. It would have easily doubled his current Manchester United salary.
When you look at the other big earners in the Premier League, or even at United, like Rashford or Casemiro.
This was in a completely different stratosphere. It's rivaling only a handful of the global elite, the Cristiano Ronaldos or the Neymars in that Saudi setup.
So from a cold transactional business perspective, that $100 million for a player who's already given the club his prime years, it's an enormous financial temptation for the hierarchy, isn't it?
It's massive.
It's money that could completely transform your financial fair play calculations for the year, provide serious capital for strategic reinvestment, and you could argue secure the financial future of the club in the short term.
It's the kind of offer that, to be frank, most clubs in Europe would be scrambling to accept. No questions asked.
Yeah, they'd bet your hand off.
And that is the exact analysis that the boardroom, likely the figures reporting to the new INEOS management, would have been doing. But, and this is the crucial part, here's where the story pivots sharply. We move from cold finance to raw, hurt emotion.
And that's the cornerstone of Bruno's revelation.
It is. His core claim is not just that he rejected the move, but that he felt the club was quietly, passively pushing him toward the exit door, desperate to pocket that $100 million check.
Diving into his quotes, the sense of hurt and betrayal is really quite palpable. He didn't mince his words at all.
No.
He said, and I'm quoting here, "From the club I felt it was, if you go, it's not so bad for us. It hurts me a bit." Now, that's not an accusation of direct malice, but it's an absolute indictment of perceived ambivalence, isn't it?
It's the feeling of being seen as a financial asset rather than a valued leader, a club captain.
Yeah.
He clarified it, saying, "More than hurting me, it makes me sad." And he justified his position by saying he is a player that no one can criticize. I'm always available. I always play. Good or bad, I give my all.
That expression of disillusionment, it suggests that even his unwavering career-defining commitment wasn't enough to make him feel properly valued by the people running the club's finances.
Not at all.
But hold on, let's just challenge this for a moment. Is it possible that the club was just being professional and transparent?
How do you mean?
Well, they received a world record offer for him. As a club captain and a loyal servant, perhaps they felt they had to inform him and allow him to consider it, respecting his own autonomy.
That's a crucial distinction. And maybe a generous reading of it.
Maybe. But does the source material give us a sense of whether this was active encouragement to leave or just really poor communication that he interpreted as indifference?
I think it does. Look, if the club had simply said, "We received this bid, you are our captain," and we immediately rejected it, that would be strong, definitive leadership.
Right. End of story.
But Bruno's commentary strongly suggests a much softer approach. He implies the directors were inclined to let him go. They liked the numbers, but they didn't have the courage to tactively force the decision to sell.
So they were waiting for him to initiate the move.
That's what it sounds like. They were trying to game the situation.
He wanted the $100 million, but they didn't want the fan backlash or the dressing room fallout of selling the club's spiritual leader.
Exactly. They were trying to manufacture a situation where Bruno was the one to pull the trigger. And Bruno credits one person, and one person only, for him staying.
The manager, Ruben Amorim.
Yeah. Bruno said Amorim wanted me and pushed hard for him to remain, which he felt overrode the calculated financial temptation from the hierarchy above.
And that immediately sets up a fascinating and deeply worrying internal conflict at the club, doesn't it? Between footballing necessity and financial opportunism.
It's the story of the last decade at United.
And he didn't stop there. He used this whole situation to highlight the cynicism of the modern game, explicitly referencing how other players force moves.
That was maybe the most acidic part of the interview. He suggested that if he'd behaved like some other modern footballers, refusing to train, going on strike, demanding a move for a lower fee,
Say 20 or 30 million.
the club would have been ecstatic to let him go. They probably would have helped facilitate a massive signing-on bonus on the other side.
But his unwavering response was, "I never did that. I never felt in a position to do it because I felt that the empathy and affection I had for the club were the same."
That's a powerful statement of personal integrity, isn't it?
It's a huge statement, and it contrasts so sharply with the mercenary attitude he suggests is prevalent elsewhere. Perhaps, as we'll get to, even within his own dressing room. It really highlights the tension between player loyalty and the modern football economy.
It does. Bruno chose loyalty, citing family reasons, and because he genuinely loves the club. But the deeper point is his lament. The issue of loyalty isn't viewed the same way it used to be. For him, loyalty is a two-way street, and he felt the club was failing to walk its side of that path.
And we have to underscore what he sacrificed beyond just the salary.
Oh, absolutely.
He explicitly noted he could have left a season ago, and the speculation was heavy around European giants like PSG or Bayern Munich, and he would have won many trophies this season.
So he didn't just turn down a lucrative retirement package in the desert?
No. He turned down a legitimate, credible chance at major European silverware, a Champions League, or a top domestic league title, to remain at a club that, by his own account, was perfectly ambivalent about whether he stayed or went.
He had to believe in the project, but he's essentially making it clear that he is the one supplying the belief and the impetus, not the structural leadership above him. The source material confirms the intense pressure. The president of Hilal called him directly.
Wow.
And Ruben Neves, his former international teammate, messaged him, saying they wanted him specifically for the Club World Cup. Bruno had every reason and motivation to leave a project in chaos, yet he stayed for the badge.
only to feel that the hierarchy viewed him purely as a highly disposable, very profitable asset. It's the ultimate good faith effort met with transactional cynicism.
Well, the club hierarchy was never going to allow that narrative of indifference or betrayal to define them, were they? Especially not under the glare of the new INEOS management.
No chance. Which takes us straight to the inevitable counter briefings that hit the wires almost as soon as Bruno's interview landed.
Indeed. We saw highly reliable reporters like Simon Stone getting the official narrative out there, and it contrasted sharply with the captain's subjective feeling of hurt.
And what was that narrative?
United sources were immediately adamant they are not planning to sell Fernandes or want him to leave, and that they see him as part of the long-term plan.
Let's talk about that phrase, long-term plan. For a player who's approaching 32, what does long-term actually mean in a project that's desperate for a rebuild?
It feels like spin, doesn't it?
It feels like pure spin. The club is just attempting to mitigate the damage by presenting a unified front after the fact.
It absolutely feels like damage limitation, and the club's position is likely rooted in that point we discussed earlier. The manager, Amorim, emphatically wanted him to stay. So the club is trying to align its overall narrative with the manager's footballing need.
They're essentially saying, we respected his choice, but we were never actively trying to offload him.
Precisely.
But let's push back on the club's claim here. If they truly saw him as vital to this long-term plan, why didn't they immediately release a strong, definitive statement rejecting the $100 million bid outright? Why not publicly reassure their captain of his status from the get-go?
Because the source material suggests a fear of reaction, doesn't it? Fear of fan reaction, fear of the manager's reaction, and a failure to secure a replacement. This looks less like strong management and more like the textbook corporate dithering that has plagued the club for years.
That is the core takeaway for me. The club likely understood that rejecting $100 million for a 31-year-old on financial grounds would be indefensible if they crashed and burned later in the season.
So they wanted the freedom to accept the money if Bruno had been the one to express a desire to leave.
Exactly. They lacked the conviction to state, unequivocally, that the value of Bruno's leadership and on-pitch output far outweigh the $100 million in the bank. Their silence and their perceived openness to the deal speaks louder than any later counter-briefing.
And the timing of this interview's release, it just amplified the drama tenfold.
Right. The interview itself was recorded a few weeks ago, likely during the previous international break, but it surfaces immediately after that chaotic, frankly shambolic match against Bournemouth.
The context of the Bournemouth game is so vital because it explains the emotional backdrop for the fan base. It wasn't just a 4-4 draw. It was a dizzying display of self-sabotage.
It was a throwback, marked by utter defensive chaos. For anyone listening who perhaps missed the game, the key takeaway was the absolute fragility of the back line and the midfield pivot.
It was almost difficult to watch. Bournemouth, a side United should be comfortably dominating at home, repeatedly cut through the midfield like a hot knife through butter.
The defensive gaps were immense, and the lack of communication was staggering. It confirmed every fan's worst fear that the structural issues at the club have not been solved. Not even close.
Yet, amidst that collective meltdown, Bruno was simultaneously the single shining light. He was rightly named Player of the Match Week for his individual brilliance.
He delivered that phenomenal, brilliant free kick strike and an assist. But crucially, he was visibly emotionally charged when he came off the pitch. He looked absolutely furious.
I saw that. He was seen pushing away a couple of teammates who tried to console him, which suggested he had just reached breaking point.
So that deep-seated frustration, magnified by the team's ongoing inability to secure leads and beat mid-table opposition, it perfectly primed the environment for his interview to land.
Oh, completely. The release of Bruno's sadness about the club wanting him to leave, coming right after he had visibly carried the team through another episode of defensive meltdown, immediately exacerbated the feeling of systemic failure among the support.
It connects his personal sense of betrayal directly to the team's professional failures.
Yeah, fans are saying if the club can't even value him, what hope is there for the rest of us? It validated the fan perspective that the club is fundamentally broken, where even the most loyal and productive player feels undervalued and unsupported by the men in suits.
The chaos on the pitch and the chaos in the boardroom suddenly became one and the same story.
So the deep dive gets personal now, doesn't it? It moves beyond the hierarchy and right into the inner workings of the club.
It really does. Bruno's interview wasn't solely about his contract situation. It was a damning wholesale indictment of the wider club culture, delivered straight from the captain's mouth.
And he used this analogy that has resonated so powerfully across the fan base, describing the perception of loyalty in English football, particularly once a player hits a certain age.
The furniture analogy.
Exactly. He said, and I think this quote will stick, in England, when a player starts approaching 30, they start thinking they need a makeover. It's like the furniture.
The comparison viewing seasoned professional players as disposable old furniture that needs replacing for aesthetic reasons. It speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the lack of long-term vision and appreciation for experience at the top level.
And it's not without precedent at United. You just have to look at the recent history. How was David De Gea treated in his final months? A long-serving, multiple Golden Glove winner.
Allowed to twist in the wind before being unceremoniously dropped.
Or the messy exit of Nemanja Matic, who felt the club lacked ambition. Even the entire protracted saga with Cristiano Ronaldo points to a history where loyalty and legacy are quickly jettisoned in favor of a perceived fresh start or financial expediency.
And Bruno sees this pattern. He realizes he's next in line to be discarded as soon as the right financial opportunity comes along.
That's it. The comparison to old furniture is a direct challenge to the club's transfer strategy. It suggests they prioritize selling established talent for maximum value, even if they can't adequately replace the dressing room presence or the immediate performance output.
They value the idea of a makeover over the substance of established quality and consistency.
And the furniture analogy, while critical of the board, led him to the most controversial and potentially damaging part of the entire interview.
The critique of his own teammates.
The line where he expresses sadness seeing players who don't value the club as much and don't defend the club as much, that is explosive.
It is. That's not just a criticism. That's a captain publicly questioning the dedication of his colleagues.
It creates an immediate fissure within the dressing room, even if he didn't name names. And the fans, naturally, immediately started speculating furiously. Who is he referring to?
Was it a lingering reflection on former players? Some fans certainly referenced the Pogba dynamic.
Yeah, his commitment was often questioned during his later years, and Bruno's arrival in 2020 essentially marked the end of Pogba's time as the central creative force, so the comparison is historically relevant.
But the immediate focus was on current players, wasn't it? The fan forums went straight to a few high-profile names.
He did. One key suspect often mentioned is young Alejandro Garnacho, citing moments of perceived casualness or what some sources described as family antics around contract discussions.
Though he's clearly a highly talented and promising young player.
Of course. But the more prominent target for speculation, given the context of poor form and high expectations, was Marcus Rashford.
Right. Rashford's inconsistent effort levels on the pitch, combined with reports of his desire for a new challenge in the past, it makes him a lightning rod.
And when Bruno talks about players who don't defend the club as much, fans immediately map that onto visible moments of a lack of tracking back or inconsistent performance from high-earning individuals.
This statement, regardless of who it was aimed at, fundamentally shifts Bruno's standing, doesn't it? It reinforces his identity as the proper presence as a leader, someone who genuinely goes to war for the badge.
He's establishing a very public benchmark for commitment. He's making it known that he holds his teammates to the same standard of constant availability and maximum effort that he sets for himself, even if that creates tension.
And that standard, the Bruno standard, is almost impossibly high.
It is. And when we look at the statistics cited in the source material, it truly puts his commitment into focus. We aren't just talking about effort, we're talking about tangible output and availability.
Since he arrived in February 2020, he has been an absolute orchestrator. Opta statistics confirm he has created a staggering 562 chances since his debut.
Now, that number sounds big on its own, but the context is crucial. That's 115 more than any other player across Europe's Big Five leagues in that same time period.
115 more. That gap isn't just significant, it's an insurmountable gulf.
It means he's not just leading the charts, he's dominating them by a country mile. And this isn't one exceptional season. This is sustained elite creativity across 4 years of instability.
Think about the physical and psychological fortitude required to maintain that level of consistency, playing almost every minute, season after season, without the structure of a truly elite team around him.
He is the engine, the creative hub, the one who unlocks low blocks, and the one who always wants the ball, even when the pressure is immense.
And despite the club's current chaos and him often being forced to play out of position, which we'll get to, his goal contribution rate remains elite.
It does. This season alone, 5 goals and 7 assists in the Premier League. As one fan wryly observed, he often trails only Haaland in goal contributions this season, and he's doing it from deep in midfield.
Starting the moves himself rather than simply finishing them.
Exactly. And this output makes the board's perceived willingness to sell him for $100 million look completely baffling to the core support. It highlights the paradox. You have a magnificent player carrying a mediocre club.
And the club seems to value the quick cash injection far more than the continuity, leadership, and guaranteed output that he provides. It forces us to ask that crucial question again. Can Manchester United truly buy that level of sustained commitment and output for $100 million?
Especially given their track record in the transfer market over the last decade. I think we all know the answer to that.
And that is the perfect segue, because the tension between that player value and the financial temptation led to a fierce debate among the fan base. Was rejecting the $100 million offer an act of necessary loyalty, or was it a moment of financial mismanagement?
The fan base is clearly split into two distinct camps on this. Their arguments are based on historical trauma and, well, tactical dogma.
Okay, let's start with Camp 1, the devoted. These are the fans who view Bruno as irreplaceable, a club legend, and believe selling him would be a huge detriment to the team.
And their primary argument rests on a deep-seated distrust of the club's ability to reinvest wisely.
The rationale is simple, isn't it? $100 million today means nothing if it's wasted tomorrow.
As one highly quoted fan comment put it, his output and leadership cannot be bought for that price. And we'd likely spend that 100-pound meters on 3 mediocre players who don't fit the system. They see him as easily worth $200 million in today's market, and selling him at his peak for half that price is a gross undervaluation.
The fear of transfer incompetence is just so strong. They cite past failures, spending big on the wrong targets, constantly buying players who need to be sold off for pennies just a few seasons later.
For them, if you sell your absolute best player, the man who guarantees a minimum level of performance, you immediately risk plummeting down the table because the margin for error in replacing him is zero.
So for the devoted, keeping Bruno is a form of risk mitigation.
It is. Now, Camp 2 is the pragmatic. They look at the numbers and the age profile with cold calculation. $100 million for a 31-year-old attacking midfielder is, by any objective standard, financially prudent.
Their argument is that this money could, hypothetically, be ring-fenced to acquire 2 top-quality younger midfielders who might better suit Amorim's specific system, thereby addressing the long-standing gaping hole in central midfield.
Their philosophical stance is that no single player is bigger than the club. They cite historical moves, Liverpool moving on Coutinho, or even United legends like David Beckham and Ruud van Nistelrooy being moved on when the manager and the club deemed it necessary.
They argue that holding on to an aging asset simply out of sentimentality is how clubs stagnate. If the money can fix 2 core positional deficiencies, the move has to be considered.
However, the source material reveals a fascinating moment of collective hindsight that seems to heavily vindicate Camp 1, the devoted.
The infamous Carlos Baleba bullet dodged.
Exactly. This anecdote has become central to the fan debate.
And the Baleba scenario was so highly referenced because it was a specific strategic choice discussed during the summer window, wasn't it?
It was. Many fans, and perhaps some directors, actively wanted Bruno sold to fund the transfer for Carlos Baleba, who was playing for Lille at the time, seen as the crucial younger defensive midfielder required to anchor the system.
Baleba eventually moved to Brighton.
And the consensus now is deep relief that United didn't execute that swap. His subsequent form at Brighton is widely perceived as disappointing, described in fan commentary as very mid, underwhelming, or less politely, shit.
Right. So the universal consensus is that selling Bruno for $100 million and using that money to sign Baleba would have been an unmitigated disaster.
And it would have left United, without a shadow of a doubt, battling for mid-table mediocrity.
It perfectly encapsulates the core problem, doesn't it? The pragmatic move selling the aging asset for huge profit is almost always ruined by the club's consistently poor execution in finding a suitable replacement.
It suggests the only asset worth keeping is the one you already have, because any future incoming asset is statistically likely to be a failure.
And this failure to trust the club's transfer competency leads directly to the tactical critique, which is arguably the technical root of all the on-pitch misery we saw against Bournemouth.
The common complaint is that Bruno is being wasted, and the team is exposed because he's frequently played in the defensive central midfield pivot rather than his natural lethal number 10 role.
That is the crux of the system problem. Bruno is a world-class number 10. He's an attacking orchestrator who thrives in the pocket of space behind the strikers. When the manager forces him into a two-man midfield, he's asked to operate as a deeper number 8 or even a number 6.
Which fundamentally exposes his defensive liabilities.
Completely. And when he's played alongside an aging anchor like Casemiro, who lacks the legs to cover ground laterally, the defensive structure just collapses.
Bruno is excellent at pressing and winning the ball back high up the pitch, but his natural instinct is to push forward, leaving massive channels of space in transition.
Which is why the opposition, like Bournemouth, found it so easy to bypass the United midfield. One fan accurately described him as a liability at CM who's being asked to climb a tree when he's a fish.
It's a great analogy.
This diminished role is why some fans, even those in Camp 1, argue that the club is wasting his talent anyway. They're calling for a definitive structural tactical shift to a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-2 setup.
Which requires acquiring a proper, disciplined holding midfielder, a true number 6 to create a protective triangle, thereby allowing Bruno to play as a pure attacking midfielder with maximum creative freedom.
The manager, Amorim, needs to adapt the system to the world-class player he has, rather than forcing the world-class player into a system that diminishes him and exposes the team defensively.
And if the long-term plan means continuing to play Bruno out of position in a crucial defensive zone, then ironically, many of the pragmatic fans would conclude the club should sell him because they are actively hindering his ability to deliver.
This entire saga, this toxic mix of financial temptation, player betrayal, and tactical chaos, now falls squarely onto the desks of the new management structure, Sir Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS.
It does. And how they handled this situation, or failed to handle it, is being seen as an early, defining test of their competency and their willingness to truly change the culture at Old Trafford.
The perception among the critical fan base is one of profound disappointment. They expected decisive, ruthless, competent management.
And instead, what they witnessed was the same dithering approach that plagued the previous regime. INEOS failed to publicly back Bruno completely by unequivocally shutting down the interest.
Yet they also failed to decisively execute a sale and replacement plan. They let Bruno make the choice, which he interpreted as tacit approval for his departure.
It reeks of indecision, doesn't it? The fans want strong leadership, someone to draw a line in the sand and say, Bruno Fernandes is our captain and not for sale at any price.
This ambiguity, this "we would like the money if you went, but we would also not mind if you stayed" attitude, is perceived as fundamentally incompetent. It shows a fear of making difficult and uncomfortable decisions.
And this indecision ties directly back to Sir Jim Ratcliffe's controversial public comments even before the takeover was finalized. He had publicly criticized previous high-value signings like Fred and Casemiro, calling them a waste of money.
And while those comments might be financially accurate, given the age profile and eventual depreciation, they raise serious questions about his emotional intelligence, his EQ, in managing a football club.
Precisely. If the CEO is making public judgments on the footballing value of players still serving the club, it undermines the confidence of current players, especially when one of them, the captain, feels he's next in line to be deemed a waste of money.
It suggests the new regime views the club purely through the lens of business transaction and asset management, failing to grasp the psychological and cultural capital that figures like Bruno Fernandes provide.
That lack of EQ is what fans fear most. They expected INEOS to instill a culture of winning and decisiveness. Instead, they're being led by executives who seem scared to offend either the fans or the bank balance, resulting in the same old mediocrity and ambiguity.
The other key implication here is Bruno's underlying motivation for giving the interview now. While club sources insist it was recorded weeks ago, its release immediately after a disastrous, chaotic result looks, well, tactical.
It looks strategic and, frankly, deliberate. Many commentators believe this is a classic, calculated move by Bruno to follow the Rooney route of putting immense public pressure on the board.
It's a very public demand for ambition.
It is. Bruno has been crystal clear. He is fiercely ambitious, and he has to believe United are capable of delivering major trophies, the Premier League or the Champions League. He is effectively telling the decision-makers, I stayed here out of loyalty and love, but you must now match my commitment with serious, tangible investment.
Particularly concerning the glaring deficiencies in midfield and defense that were so brutally exposed in that 4-4 draw.
The timing, so close to the January transfer window, acts as a clear warning shot. He wants to win legit trophies, as one fan put it. He sees himself as a player deserving of silverware, and if the club can't provide that platform, he will go find it elsewhere.
He's issuing an ultimatum wrapped in a statement of loyalty.
Exactly. And this brings us to the exit timeline, which suddenly feels more immediate than it did 6 months ago. A move in the upcoming January window is deemed highly unlikely.
You'd think so, unless an absolutely outrageous bid materializes and the club can quickly find a world-class replacement, which history suggests is a fantasy.
Right. But many fans and commentators believe this interview marks the beginning of the end.
It feels like a public preparation for a summer departure. If United fails to secure Champions League football, or if the INEOS structure fails to show serious, tangible progress in January, Bruno is widely expected to leave in the summer of 2025.
He'll pursue the major silverware that his quality deserves, perhaps making a move to Spain or Italy, leagues where fans feel his style of play would make him an absolute god. His ambition is undeniable, and he's approaching the age where he can't afford to waste more seasons on rebuilding projects.
He delivered on his end of the bargain by turning down fortunes and titles. The club has not delivered on its end by providing a winning structure. He has stayed, but his patience is visibly wearing thin.
So we've uncovered this deep-seated tension at the very heart of Manchester United.
It is the painful, unavoidable clash between Bruno Fernandes' genuine, heart-on-sleeve loyalty, a commitment that saw him turn down fortunes and almost guaranteed titles elsewhere, and the cold, hard, profit-driven financial business of modern football.
A business exemplified by that 100 million valuation placed on him by the club's hierarchy.
Bruno Fernandes has given the club his absolute prime years during their most tumultuous modern period. And for what? He's achieved what is, frankly, a measly return of trophies when measured against the club's heritage.
He is staying for now because of his ambition and his sincere love for the badge, but by giving this interview, he has placed the responsibility squarely back on the decision-makers at Old Trafford.
He has publicly exposed the vast, critical gap between his personal effort and the club's current, structurally challenged commitment to excellence.
It is a defining moment for his legacy and for the club's future under INEOS. And this leaves us with a truly provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Given the clear division in the fan base, the club's consistent track record of failed rebuilding, and the years of chaos and disappointment he has endured, if Bruno Fernandes were to retire tomorrow, how would history remember him?
Would he be seen as an all-time legend in the mold of Brian Robson, a magnificent shining light and definitive leader in the club's darkest chapter?
Or, simply, as the magnificent player who the institution failed most profoundly, allowing his generational talent to be consumed by their own systemic incompetence?